Okay, Chair, when you're ready, we're now live on YouTube. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to East Devon District Council's virtual Community Grant Panel meeting today, the 25th of November, 2021. I'm your chair, Councillor Jack Rowland, and I would also like to welcome anyone watching the meeting via the live streaming. All participants here today are taking part remotely, and as well as being live streamed, the meeting is being recorded. So please bear this in mind throughout, and may I remind you to be careful with your language. May I also remind members that the Code of Conduct applies throughout the meeting. We also reserve the right to remove and disconnect any participant who is disrupting the meeting by whatever means. Please turn any telephone devices off or to silent. Following the meeting of Council on the 26th of July, Council has delegated much of the decision taking to senior officers for a short period of time due to concerns around COVID. Consequently, this will be a consultative meeting only. We will adhere as much as possible to the procedural rules detailed in the Constitution. Accordingly, where the meeting would have normally decided a matter, this will now be a recommendation to the senior officer to make the decision, having regard to the views expressed in this meeting. As this meeting is dependent on internet connection, in the event of a breaking connection, rather a breaking connection, please bear with us as we try to reconnect. After 15 minutes, if you're not able to reconnect, we'll consider the meeting adjourned and reconvene at a later date. Please make sure all phones are muted and microphones are muted when you are not speaking to avoid any background noise levels. Keep points short and do not repeat points that have already been made, and do not interrupt. If you wish to comment, please raise your electronic hand and wait to be called. We will now start the meeting by doing a roll call of committee members here present. Over to you, Debbie.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start with Councillor Bailey, please.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Key has given his apologies. Councillor Loudon, please.
Present, Debbie. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Parr, please.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Pook, I don't see online. Councillor Ranger, please.
Present.
Thank you. And finally, yourself, Chair, Councillor Rowland.
Very much present. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Chair. You're definitely correct.
Thank you. Okay, agenda item 1 is public speaking. I don't believe we have any public speakings that have registered. So we can move on to agenda item 2, which is the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 31st of August of this year. If anyone has a comment on the set of minutes from that date, please do so by raising your electronic hand. If I have no hands raised, I will take this as an indication that you all endorse the minutes. I can't see any hands raising, so we can move on and we'll endorse those minutes. Thank you. Agenda item 3 is apologies. Debbie, I heard you say that we've had apologies from Councillor David Key.
Yes, that's it. That's all I've received, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. Agenda item 4 is declarations of interest. Debbie, over to you again.
So, shall we do this a little quicker, Chair? If anyone's got any declarations they wish to declare, can they please raise their electronic hand and we'll take them that way? Otherwise, I'll assume that there are no declarations at this time.
No. Okay, fine.
Okay.
Just before we move on as well, see that Councillor... Oh, thank you.
Oh, it's only just to
Councillor
declare
Jess.
personal interest as a Devon County Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Noted, thank you. Just before we move on then to the next agenda item, I see that Councillor Paul Millar has joined us as well. So welcome as a guest. I'm sure he might wish to speak later on. So welcome, Paul. Agenda item 5 is matters of urgency. There are no matters of urgency that have been communicated. So agenda item 6, confidential exempt items. Again, there are no confidential exempt items which officers recommend should be dealt with in this way. So moving on to agenda item 7, which is to discuss a small community grant stream proposal. And I'd like to hand over to Jamie to introduce her report. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you very much, Chair. Okay, so
in discussion with you, Chair, I've decided to put forward a proposal that we set up a small community grants fund, because there's currently about £70,000 left in the crowdfund East Devon pot. Through that, we've enabled some fantastic projects, but £70,000 is quite a bit of money to have remaining. And it's a really difficult time for the voluntary and community sector. So I know when myself and Councillor Armstrong ran the community day last week, the Working Together event with the voluntary and community sector, they are struggling quite a bit for small amounts of funding at the moment, or larger amounts of funding as well, obviously. So the idea would be to top slice some of that crowdfund East Devon pot that's still remaining, and use it to create a small community grants scheme. I'm proposing at the moment, although this is all obviously all up for discussion, that the grants would be between about £300 and £500 to projects that help either achieve one or more of the aims in the council plan, or one or more of the priorities or actions in the poverty strategy, because councillors have obviously agreed that those are your priorities, so why not put it towards those two? But obviously that is quite a wide-ranging choice of projects, so it could be that this panel decides to narrow that down a little bit more. And the decision-making process as well was something I particularly wanted your thoughts on, councillors' thoughts on. Would you prefer to see it happen by email as with the crowdfund East Devon monies, or would you prefer to have meetings every 6 weeks, every 8 weeks? So your thoughts on that would be very much appreciated if indeed you are supportive of the proposal. I've drafted some guidance that essentially the voluntary and community sector would use to see if they're eligible for the funding, or to try and get projects together that would fit within the funding criteria. And I've also drafted a quick application form as well, which is all part of the agenda. With such small grants, so if it was 3,000, sorry, I don't know why I keep saying that, 300 to £500, it would need to be a fairly light touch application form. Obviously, we don't want them spending all their time filling in the application form. We want them putting their energies into the project itself and coming up with those projects, and doing the good work on the ground. So that's just a quick introduction. Back over to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Just before I open it out as well to members, and can I just ask as well, I mean, once this pot of money is gone, it's gone, isn't it? It's not money that we'll be receiving through other mediums again in the future. No,
so the money has come from essentially an underspent fund that Devon County Council and us ran, I think it was now about 4 years ago. So there's quite a significant underspend, most of which was actually Devon County Council's money, but they have allowed us to keep it and spend it on behalf of them under the East Devon District Council banner, on East Devon community projects. So we've been working our way down that funding for now, and yeah, once it's gone, it's gone. Obviously, if members do decide, if this small grants does happen and members do decide it's something that you want to continue, then it's something that could be discussed with full council. But with budgets as they are at the moment, chances are, once it's gone, it's gone. And Devon County Council did give us permission to use that underspend for crowdfund East Devon, which is what we're currently using it for, and also for small community grants such as this. So any diversification of the money over and above those kind of two things would need to be discussed with them, because technically it is still their money, because it's an underspend from grants that they were involved in that we distributed on their behalf.
And again, can I just ask another question in case it's occurring to members? Is there a timescale when this money has to be spent by?
No, there isn't.
Okay.
No timescale at the moment. Obviously, they could ask for it back at any point in time, but I don't think they will. No, I think it'll just keep going.
Okay, thanks, Jamie.
Okay,
I'll open it up now. Paul, Councillor Millar, see.
Thanks. What I'm about to say, please, I don't want it to be taken as an insult in any way to this grants panel, but I think there's a democracy argument here of this is a small panel, this is a lot of money. At most, as I've researched, district councils, as well as the county council in Devon and across the country, they have they have locality budgets that the councillors can spend directly themselves. And I personally think that's a much more effective, quicker, and more democratic way of spending money within communities. And it also makes sure that it has the greatest potential to ensure that all communities across East Devon get that money. I think there's an argument that, you know, getting this panel meeting every 6 weeks, are all of the members going to be able to attend that every 6 weeks? Not all of the members of this panel represent everywhere in the district, even though I know that none of the members of the panel would ever be parochial in terms of picking projects that were in their ward. I'm not saying that whatsoever. What I'm proposing, not that I'm a member of this panel, is that whilst I know this money isn't going to come around necessarily again, it's a good opportunity to trial a locality budget where you give, so there's £70,000. You don't have to give all the money to the council, but you could give £500 to each councillor and see how they spend it. That would be 30,000. Just see how it goes and see whether it works. There would have to be guidelines with that as well. I see Councillor Bailey's put a hand up. I'd be interested to hear from her on, she's recently become a county councillor, so she now has a locality budget. I'd be interested to see what her views are on it, on what I'm suggesting, because it's just something I'd really like to do as an East Devon district councillor. I know certain groups in my ward that do some brilliant things that don't necessarily often have the capacity to apply for these funds. There is the danger, of course, that you end up having councillors constantly picking their pet projects. But if you were to have some strong guidelines where councillors couldn't pick the same organisation if this trial proves successful, I do think there are safeguards in place to ensure that there wouldn't be any conflicts of interest, for example, and pet projects that councillors would benefit from. So yeah, I'm gonna wait for Councillor Bailey to give her view, because as a county councillor, I think she's the only person on this panel that has funds that she can distribute as part of her role. So I'll end it there. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Paul. So if I invite Jess to speak first and then Helen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad that Councillor Millar raised that, because I was thinking about raising that myself, because I think having a locality budget, I mean, I'm obviously new to Devon County Council, but I think that it does feel a democratic way to distribute funds. I think that as the elected member, you are a person that people can approach, and I think in my experience so far, it's a scheme that works well, and if there are funds available, I think that it would be a good, and the right guidance is drawn up, I think it is a good way of distributing funds, and all those 60 members would have access to some degree of funds, and I'm supportive of that, and I think that meeting probably every 6 weeks is probably not particularly practical, probably. So yeah, I'm supportive of that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jess. Councillor Power, Helen.
Thank you. I'm not so sure about this. This system has worked very well. Yes, there's an amount left over at the moment, but I think, as has been proposed, if we were to be given authority to vote by email, seems to work pretty well, supporting or not supporting, and Jamie then can take the consensus. I think this system has very good guidelines already. And I'm not sure that we should abandon it.
Okay, thank you. Is that a new hand that's been raised, Jess? Okay.
Afraid it is. Yeah, I wasn't envisaging that this committee kind of, disbanded completely, but my approach would be, well, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that this would continue with community buildings, but this would be a supplementary scheme for the £70,000 on a trial basis. So we would continue doing our excellent work as a panel, but then it would be supplemented by our diligent councillors in their wards.
Thank you, Jess. Jamie, you wish to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to sort of explain that, Crowdfund Devon is a partnership approach. So we're in it with Devon County Council and Devon and Cornwall Police. And we are sort of running at least till the end of this year, by which time that money may have gone down quite significantly. And obviously Devon County Council, seeing as it's sort of technically their money, are very keen to keep going with Crowdfund Devon. So it may be that a small amount of money could be top sliced off that £70,000. But in terms of wanting to keep the Crowdfund Devon partnership going, we would need to keep some money in Crowdfund East Devon, which may, as Councillor Millar suggested, leave councillors with maybe £500 each, which might be one project, to make a worthwhile contribution. It's just something to think about, yeah.
Thanks, Jamie. Councillor Loudon, John.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not necessarily against the idea that we have a locality fund. I'm perhaps slightly jaundiced against it, having said that from my local experience of how I see it used and has been used for many years. If there were to be any kind of locality fund, then I'd want to see some very clear guidelines set around it. I'd want to be clear about how much would be allocated to each councillor. And I think we'd need to have some real thought about what we want in it. And I don't see it as it being the small community grants proposal or this at all. I think we should continue with the proposition as proposed by Jamie and the chair here. And if there is thought about creating a locality fund, then I think that needs to be drafted up. And I think whether it be us or another part of the council needs then to consider how we move that forward. I'm not sure quite at the moment how it would work if, for example, we were all given £500 or all had access to £500, for example, would necessarily work. I think we need to give that a little bit more thought.
Thanks, John. Paul, you wish to come back again?
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, my connection's a bit bad, so sorry I can't have my video on, but can't we be pragmatic and go, I'm not on the panel, but the panel resolved to contact Devon County Council and have discussions with them about whether they would be happy for, say, 30,000 to be used for this purpose as a trial. And then whilst we're having that conversation, obviously Devon County have their own guidelines for use of the locality budget. So I think Councillor Loudon's saying this might take time to work out. I think that the sort of large number of councils that have these locality budgets in place already, I don't think it's going to take too long to find some model guidance that can be put in place to ensure that, as Councillor Loudon says, there's no question of how the money might be used. I think I want to just go back to the original point, and I think Councillor Bailey mentioned it as well. On this meeting every 6 weeks doesn't seem greatly pragmatic, but also I really feel uncomfortable with these decisions being taken by email. I think the most democratic way is reaching all communities. And I actually think that Devon County Council would be really open to the suggestion, because by having the ward members, it is guaranteed to reach every single corner of East Devon in a way that it might not if we were to continue with this process. And I heard Councillor Loudon saying these are two different debates, but I don't think it is, because I think this is about small community grants. The locality budgets that happen in all other councils are about small community grants. There's a lot of money left in this crowdfund East Devon fund. I think it's our responsibility to use it as soon as possible. We know there are lots and lots of organisations. I know a number in my area that could really do with this money right now. I can identify one or two voluntary organisations that, simply because what they're doing on the front line to alleviate things like poverty that are happening over the winter, they simply don't have time to be going through application processes. So I honestly, I think it's a pragmatic way forward, and I just hope that this panel will have some resolve to have discussions with Devon County to see whether this can be used. The top slice, 30,000, can be used for a trial locality fund with guidance attached. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Can I bring officers back in before I invite Jess again? Debbie, you wish to make a comment?
Yeah, Chair, I've just been going back through to try and find the original terms of reference for when this group was set up as a community fund panel. It was just to give a note of caution, really, Chair. I think, as Councillor Loudon mentioned earlier, it might be much more helpful to the group to have a paper drafted that explored those issues further. So I certainly would want to get our legal services department involved, just to cast an eye over it. I don't want to hold anything up, but I think it'd be very wise for all members to have everything in front of them. And has been mentioned, we need to check that county are on board with that too, before you make any decisions or suggestions for a senior officer decision this afternoon. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for doing that. Okay, thanks. Jamie, can I bring you back in?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so the Devon County Council locality budgets, this may be some of what Jess is about to say, but they do have application forms. So there are forms that have to be filled in. Obviously, this is public money, so they have to be accountable for it. So it's certainly not a non-application process. They still do have to fill something in and go through all the proper processes. The thing that's different with the locality budgets is it's an individual councillor making a decision, as opposed to a grants panel really making a decision. And yeah, the locality budget's £500 per councillor. It might, yeah, it to me also, as Debbie's just mentioned, seems like it needs discussing on its own, because it's something that some of you may not understand the whole process, apart from Jess, obviously, who does it. So I think it would be important, again, to have a report on what that might look like before making any decisions. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Jamie. Jess.
Thank you. Yes, so the way it works, and I'm really not an expert, but basically you get approached as a county councillor, and then you decide whether you give your in principle consent or not, and then the applicant fills out a form that's, I think it's on the website, and then that's approved by so the details approved through council officers. But what I just wanted to ask Jamie, can you remind me, Jamie, please? So I think the pot started with 100,000 in the crowdfund East Devon. Is that correct? And was that 4 years ago? So does that mean that there've been 30,000 spent?
It started off with £110,000 underspend, and then it took us about a year to sort it out and get off the ground. So I would say that money's been spent. I think we've spent about £35,000 in the last 12 months. I did work out for our service planning day the other day. So it's been 35,000 in the last 12 months. I'm aware of another 3 or 4 projects that I've had not involvement in, but been communicating with, that are also interested in running crowdfunding schemes. And they are, having sort of dealt with grants now for the council for the last 13 years, they are very good projects that come forward through crowdfunder. So there's the Exmouth Beach wheelchairs, which is a particularly good one. There's the Axminster Community Waffle House. So the the kind of bigger projects that is supporting, and it also gets buy-in from the community as well. So for example, if you're crowdfunding, you have to raise the first 25% from your local community, so everybody gets involved, everybody donates, not for everybody obviously, but people donate from the local community, and it does a lot of good that a traditional grants funding scheme is a bit more limited really in the benefits. So that's why we sort of decided to go into crowdfunding and give it a go, and it seems to be quite more popular recently. Obviously, with any grant scheme, it takes a while to get it off the ground, hence the £110,000 underspend from a grant scheme that was only run for 1 year, because it takes a while to get people to know about it and how to apply for it. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jess. Helen.
Thank you. Whatever, a new system will take a while to set up. And I think what Jamie and the chairman have come up with has a simplicity to it. The application form is not onerous. And I would have thought that smaller organisations would cope with it perfectly well. I think it's a very good proposal.
Thank you, Helen. Val.
So I hope you can hear, because it's a...
Can you hear me, Val? You just...
Yeah, can you hear me?
You keep dipping out though, unfortunately.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you as soon as you say, can you hear me now? I hear that, and then it goes, can't hear you after that.
If you can hear me or not. I'll keep going.
Okay.
I think one of the reasons the crowdfunding fund is taken up so slowly is complication for some groups with having to have things like planning permission in place. And so sometimes they get notification of the deadline for the scheme. I'm seeing the next deadline, for example, is January, and I'm thinking of a scheme locally that could go through the crowdfunding, but of course, in place and have everything in, and the three quotes they need in time for the January. Although I agree with the whole process, but I think the complexity of the process is why it's so slow to get the... I don't know if Paul can tell us what amounts other councils give their councillors. It seems quite a small amount, and I can imagine how perhaps disappointed people would be if it's this kind of a race to the front line to get some funds, and then you miss out for a good year, a year and a bit, before another, application can come in. So I agree with the points that John has made. I think this. So I do spend a lot of time, and I'm sure other people do, reading the applications. They're very worthwhile, the ones that have come in. Perhaps Paul could tell us what the amount that he's saying other councillors get.
Okay, Val, it keeps dipping in and out, but I think we've all got the gist of what you're saying, and I really appreciate your circumstances at the moment and for the contribution you've made. So before I bring in the other people, you asked Paul to respond to something, so if I invite him to come back in.
Thanks, Chair. I really appreciate that. I'll give one example. South Hams have and they call it the Sustainable Communities Locality Fund. Each council has £2,000 a year, which is a lot of money, but they don't have as many councillors. So obviously it doesn't cost as much in total. A minimum grant that can be applied for is £100. So yeah, I think, I mean, I'm sort of edging towards what you, Chair, and Councillor Loudon was saying, what Councillor Ranger was said. We probably need a report on this, but I just think in the future, you know, I think crowdfunding is not an option for certain organisations. It's too complex, and I think there are certain organisations that miss out on our grants from on certain money that we have to spend. And I think it would be a really good idea if the panel was to resolve that a report would come back to the next meeting, looking at examples of locality budgets working across Devon, how they all work, and maybe how we could come up with a system at East Devon in the future. I'd like to see such a system be implemented as soon as possible. So, you know, that's my position. Thank you.
Thanks. Jamie, can I bring you back in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to say that I think what Cllr Ranger is referring to in some points is the Community Buildings Fund, because there's no deadline for crowdfunding. You don't have to have planning permission or quotes. Crowdfunding your project can be right at the initial stages, really. The work with crowdfunding comes in terms of getting the donations in from the local community. So some groups do struggle a bit with that, but you know, all the projects that are eligible for crowdfund Devon have been, you know, funded by this panel in the end.
Yeah, we're certainly not talking about the Community Buildings Fund under this agenda, because that's working perfectly well from my perspective. So, John, and then Jess, and then I'd like to move to if anybody wishes to make a recommendation after the next two speakers.
Well, of course, the Community Buildings Fund would work well under your chairmanship, wouldn't it, Chair?
I couldn't possibly comment, John.
Right, going a serious point. Right, going back to the documentation that Jamie's provided. Thank you, and I'm going to the guidance note that Jamie has got here, and within that, I'm content with the projects must help achieve either or both of the following, and then there's 1 and 2 set out there. That's fine with me. The bit that just makes it's a question really, or concern about who can apply. I've got no issue about voluntary and community sector groups and organisations. Got no issue charities. No issue with others such as CICs. I'm just wondering, are we really in wanting to give money to town and parish councils if they come forward with small schemes? I'm just putting a question mark against that. I can see all the others, definitely a tick. I'm very hesitant about the town and parish councils, particularly as I believe, and I may be wrong here, that some of them have got some significant amounts of money in their reserves, and so in which case then would we be wanting to give them 500 quid, for example, when, you know, I don't know, they've got X thousands or hundreds of thousands in the bank, albeit earmarked for particular projects. So that's my only concern I've got here. And I do think that if anyone wants to look at an alternative or a parallel set of arrangements, as Paul Millar has been talking about, then that needs to be taken separately to this, Chair.
Thank you, John. Okay, Jess.
Sorry, only just a very quick point. I've just unmuted myself. And I think, yes, I think the issue with the crowdfunder is that there are types of organisations that find it difficult to get their heads round crowdfund. So I'm sure that the projects have been really, really good. But I think that we need to maybe look at new and innovative ways of distributing grants whilst recognising the very good work of the community buildings panel grants.
Okay, I think it's been a very useful discussion about this. I think we're at the point now where I'm looking for a member to put forward a recommendation. John.
Chair, well, I would propose that we adopt Jamie's report, or with the exception, as I say, of the towns and parishes in the guidance note. I haven't heard anybody disagree with that point.
Is there a seconder for that? Helen?
No, I was going to say that this point about the towns and parish councils, I don't think maybe towns. I think that's where my sticking point is. I think up to now, all our grants have gone to parishes. I'm not sure. I mean, I agree with what Councillor Loudon's saying. I'm not sure if maybe we should include towns, but I do think parishes, because very often their projects depend on them drawing in outside funding.
John, would you be willing to accept an amendment to your recommendation along those lines?
Yes.
Thank you. So, Helen, will you now second that original recommendation? Thank you. Okay. I'm going to now ask for a, Jess, I know you've got your hand up, but we've actually put a motion, a recommendation for, which has been seconded. If we take the vote on that first to see what happens with the voting. Can I hand over to Debbie then? So it's green ticks in favour, red crosses against, or yellow marigolds if you're abstaining.
So, Jess, if you're abstaining, you're leaving a hand up. Just wanted to check because it was up before the vote started. Okay, thank you. Right, so members, green tick please if you are in support, red cross if you are against. So this is agreeing the proposal put forward under this item, with the one change being that the who can apply does not include town councils. So, Chair, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 votes against, 4 votes for, do apologise, no votes against and no abstentions. So that is carried. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Debbie. Before we move on to the next item, I just would like to add as well, I do appreciate where Councillor Millar is coming from on this particular subject. I think my concern is that because this money is, once it's gone, it's gone. If we then use a slice of it to for the equivalent of locality budgets, I think there'd be an expectations amongst all councillors that it's going to be something that's going to be built into all the budgets in the future.
It's a trial, Jack, was what I would suggest.
Okay. But I think if we could take it off down a different route to see if there's support perhaps for locality budgets for councils as well, then I think that could be a worthwhile exercise anyway. So thank you, Paul, for your contribution today. Can we move on then to agenda item H, which is the revised Community Buildings Fund guidance? Jamie, over to you to introduce this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, just skipping back slightly to the last item. I could potentially prepare a paper for you on locality budgets and how that might look, if that's something that you would like me to do for our next meeting.
Well, can I ask, again, should we take this as a formal green tick and red cross exercise? So if we can, could somebody formally move that as a recommendation then as a separate item? Jess, do you want to come up with a form?
I would like to formally move that we have a report brought back on a scheme around, or certainly a trial scheme around a locality budget for members. Thank you.
Okay, is there a seconder for that?
Well,
John,
if I may, we're now broadening this out. So I wanted to go back, and I can't remember who said it. It may have been Jess, so forgive me if it wasn't. But someone was talking earlier on about us looking at broader, more imaginative, that's perhaps the wrong phrase, broader ways of distributing our funds. And I think rather than just saying we want to look at one particular way of doing it, i.e. locality funds, and forgive me, I am slightly nervous about those. And I think Jess has, I'm sorry, Paul, but that is an anxiety I have. And if it is locality funds that we end up with, so be it. But I think it's worth picking up the point that was made about trying to have a broader look at how we distribute funds in the round. And then you can boil it down to what is either the better way of doing it, or additional way of doing it, or additional ways of doing it. So I would see a slightly broader proposal than Jess put on the table. I don't know if that gets anybody's support.
Jess, would you be willing to accept what John has said?
Well, the main thing for me is to have a look at locality budgets. So if it's going to include other things, then that's fine by me as well. Thank you.
I would support what John has just said. It's Val.
Okay, Val, thank you. So I'll take that then, John, that you seconded what Jess has put forward now, because she's accepted what you've said as well.
Whichever way you want to deal with it, Chair.
Yeah, well, I've taken it that way, that Jess has proposed it and you've seconded it then. Okay. So although strictly speaking, it's not on the agenda then, if we could to show our voting as to whether we're in favour of that, for the benefit of...
Thank you. If you can use your green ticks if you're in support. So we're looking at a further report on more innovative ways of spending this grant funding, including a locality aspect. So, Chair, I have 5 votes for, no votes against, and no abstentions. So that's carried, and some more work for Jamie. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Okay, then if I can move back onto the agenda, item 8, back over to you, Jamie.
Thank you. Sorry, Chair.
Just increasing your workload again.
It'll be quite an interesting piece of work for me, researching what all the other councils are currently doing, because I think things have changed quite a bit recently over the last couple of years.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, Community Buildings Fund, proposal for revised guidance. This was a report that was requested by members at the last meeting that we had. It came out of the fact that I was having to assess some of the community buildings applications with lower scores, purely because of the guidance that was in front of us and purely because of what was currently eligible. So it came to the point where we thought, rather than try and fit projects with the guidance, why don't we change the guidance to fit what we want to support, or what you want to support, which is what I've done. So I've added in extra pieces to the guidance. I've changed some of it. I've made some of it clearer to try and make it work more along the lines of what I was getting the impression that you wish to do, that you wish to fund. So there's a table there that says, that sort of outlines what I've changed and why. And then there's a copy of the current revised guidance. So it's just if you'd like to have a discussion about that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you for setting it out so clearly. So thank you for that. I'll open it out to members. John.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, Jamie, thank you for setting it out. So I've gone to, I've opened the document, and it's the, it's the redraft Community Buildings Fund for consideration document, not the main document, the other one. And I'm looking at the second page. I've just lost it. Third page, I do beg your pardon, Chair. The third page. So it says what what we will fund. And I also don't disagree with what's being said there. I just wonder, we've got modernising / improving outdated facilities. So that's a very broad catch-all, which is fine. But we also above it have kitchen refits, which is, to me, it's a specific subset of that. So I wonder whether we take kitchen refits out and put it perhaps underneath modernising and improving outdated facilities, and then going, e.g., kitchen refits. One of the things that we've also had several of have been like audio and visual facilities, haven't we? So whether we could do a couple of EGs under that. Other than that, I'm quite content, Chair.
Okay. Are you putting that forward as a recommendation then, John, with those changes?
Oh, go on, Chair.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for what John was proposing? Jess, is that to second John?
Yes, I'm happy to second that. I was going to say something else as well.
Okay, well, by all means. I just wanted to formally get a seconder in as well. Over to you, Jess.
So where it says in the chart, all projects that were listed as eligible in the guidance were to do with the structure of the buildings or itself, the building itself, or projects inside the building. But then when it's changed to eligible projects must be for, I can't see that things with the new guidance, that things within the buildings are included in that section. Have I missed something? So for instance, a kitchen. So it says eligible projects must be for the buildings itself, structures permanently attached, and car parks.
Jamie, do you want to reply to Jess?
Yeah, anything within the building would also be eligible as long as it was kind of permanently fixed, but I can certainly make that clearer. Yeah, good point. Thank you.
Okay. I can't see any other hands being raised at the moment, so bearing in mind the suggestions that have been put forward, which I think is clear to everybody, unless we want them read out again. Yeah, I've getting some nodding heads. So if we can take a vote on that basis, then Debbie, can I ask you to do the green tick and red cross exercise?
Yep, so members, if you could please use your green ticks if you're on support, red cross if you're against, or raise your electronic hand if you are abstaining. So I did see a flash of a tick on Val Ranger and then it disappeared. It might be you're on a slightly, yep. Oh, you're back, Val. Fantastic. So Chair, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 votes in support, no votes against and no abstentions. So that's carried. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Debbie. Okay, so now bring the meeting to a close then. I would like to thank everyone, including any members of the public that have been watching online, for taking part. However, can I just remind all those present that the supporting officer will confirm when the meeting is no longer being recorded or going live. And until then, your comments will be live to the public. Thank you very much.